don't go to the movies, do you?
I don't go out that much. Is there a reason why you're asking me this? You know, maybe you had a recommendation.
Anthony Clare, 3650 Rathburn Road.
There are certain films that don't simply tell a story, but instead operate like a quiet psychological echo, lingering in the mind long after the screen fades to black. And Enemy, 2014, is one of those rare, unsettling experiences that seems to exist somewhere between reality and nightmare. It begins in a way that feels almost ordinary, grounded in routine and repetition, following Adam Bell, a college history professor whose life is defined by monotony. His day is blurred together in a cycle of lectures, grading papers, and returning to a dim, lifeless apartment where even his relationship feels distant and mechanical. There is a quiet heaviness to his existence, a sense that something is missing, though he cannot quite name what that absence is. This emotional stagnation becomes the foundation upon which the entire narrative slowly unfolds, creating a sense of unease before anything unusual even happens. One evening, almost by accident, Adam rents a film recommended by a colleague, a simple act that seems trivial at first, but becomes the catalyst for everything that follows. As he watches the movie, something strange begins to creep into his awareness, something so subtle that it takes a moment for him to fully process it. In a minor background role, an actor appears who looks exactly like him. Not similar, not vaguely resembling, but identical in every conceivable way. The discovery is jarring, almost impossible to rationalize, and yet it is undeniably real. This moment shifts the entire tone of the story, transforming it from a quiet character study into something far more disorienting and psychologically intense. What follows is not a straightforward investigation, but a descent into obsession. Adam becomes fixated on finding this man, unable to let go of the idea that somewhere out there exists another version of himself living a completely separate life. He tracks down the actor, whose name is Anthony Clare, and begins to piece together fragments of his existence. Anthony is everything Adam is not: confident, assertive, and seemingly in control of his surroundings. He has a wife, a different career, a different presence, and yet he shares the same face, the same voice, the same physical identity. The contrast between them is not just external, but deeply psychological, as if they represent two halves of a fractured whole. When Adam finally makes contact, the encounter is charged with tension that is difficult to articulate. It is not simply two identical men meeting. It feels like a confrontation between identities, between suppressed desires and lived realities. Anthony reacts with hostility and suspicion, while Adam approaches the situation with a mix of curiosity and fear. The dynamic between them is unstable from the very beginning, as if the existence of one threatens the very foundation of the other. There is an unspoken understanding that this situation cannot coexist peacefully, that something will inevitably collapse under the weight of this impossible reality. As the story progresses, the boundaries between their lives begin to blur in increasingly unsettling ways. Adam becomes more entangled in Anthony's world, stepping into spaces that do not belong to him, interacting with people who mistake him for someone else. At the same time, Anthony grows more aggressive, more controlling, as if he feels his identity slipping away. The tension escalates not through action, but through atmosphere, through a creeping sense of dread that something irreversible is approaching. The film does not rely on conventional suspense, but instead builds a psychological pressure that becomes almost suffocating. The relationships surrounding both men add another layer of complexity to the narrative. Adam's girlfriend senses his distance, his distraction, but cannot understand the true cause. Anthony's wife, on the other hand, begins to notice subtle changes, small inconsistencies that suggest something is not quite right. These interactions are filled with ambiguity, leaving the viewer constantly questioning what is real and what is imagined. The film refuses to provide clear answers, instead inviting interpretation and speculation, which only deepens its unsettling effect. One of the most striking aspects of the story is its use of symbolism, particularly the recurring imagery that appears almost without explanation. These elements are not presented in a way that demands immediate understanding, but instead function as fragments of a larger psychological puzzle. They evoke themes of control, identity, and entrapment, reinforcing the idea that the narrative is not just about two identical men, but about something far more abstract and internal. The film operates on a level that feels almost subconscious, as if it is tapping into fears and anxieties that are difficult to articulate. The relationship between Adam and Anthony continues to deteriorate, shifting from curiosity to rivalry and eventually to something far darker. There is a sense that they cannot both exist in the same space, that one must ultimately dominate or erase the other. This conflict is not resolved through clear logic or explanation, but through a series of events that feel both inevitable and incomprehensible. The film deliberately avoids providing closure in a traditional sense, instead leaving the viewer with a lingering sense of ambiguity. What makes the narrative particularly compelling is the way it reflects themes of duality and self-perception. Adam and Anthony can be interpreted not just as two separate individuals, but as manifestations of different aspects of the same person. One represents routine, passivity, and suppression, while the other embodies desire, control, and impulsiveness. Their conflict becomes symbolic of an internal struggle, a battle between opposing forces within a single identity. This interpretation is never explicitly confirmed, but the film provides enough hints to make it a compelling perspective. The pacing of the story is deliberately slow, almost hypnotic, allowing the tension to build gradually. There are no sudden shocks or dramatic revelations in the conventional sense, but rather a continuous escalation of unease. The atmosphere is heavy, almost oppressive, reinforced by a muted color palette and a sound design that emphasizes silence and subtle disturbances. Every element of the film works together to create a sense of disorientation, making the viewer feel as though they are experiencing the story from within Adam's fractured perspective. As the narrative approaches its conclusion, the line between reality and illusion becomes increasingly blurred. The events that unfold do not provide clear answers, but instead deepen the mystery, leaving the viewer to question everything they have seen. The final moments are particularly striking, delivering an image that is both shocking and symbolic, one that encapsulates the film's themes in a way that is open to interpretation. It is a conclusion that does not resolve the story, but instead amplifies its ambiguity, ensuring that it lingers in the mind long after it ends. The film's strength lies not in its plot, but in its ability to evoke a psychological experience. It challenges the viewer to engage with it on a deeper level, to look beyond the surface and consider the underlying themes and meanings. It is not a film that offers easy answers or straightforward entertainment, but one that demands attention and reflection. For some, it may feel frustrating or confusing, but for others, it becomes a deeply rewarding exploration of identity and perception. At its core, the story is about the fear of losing oneself, of confronting parts of one's identity that are hidden or suppressed. It explores the idea that we are not as singular as we believe, that there may be conflicting versions of ourselves existing beneath the surface. This concept is both fascinating and unsettling, tapping into a universal anxiety about identity and control. The film does not attempt to resolve this anxiety, but instead embraces it, allowing it to define the entire experience. The more one thinks about the story, the more it seems to expand, revealing new layers and interpretations. It is a film that invites analysis, that encourages viewers to revisit it and reconsider its meaning. Each viewing can feel slightly different, as if the narrative itself is shifting, reflecting the viewer's own perspective and state of mind. This quality makes it not just a film, but an experience, one that continues to evolve even after it has ended. In the end, what makes this story so powerful is its refusal to conform to expectations. It does not provide clear answers, it does not resolve its conflicts in a traditional way, and it does not guide the viewer toward a single interpretation. Instead, it presents a fragmented, unsettling vision of identity and leaves it up to the viewer to make sense of it. This approach may not appeal to everyone, but for those willing to engage with it, it offers something truly unique and unforgettable. It is the kind of film that stays with you, not because of what it shows, but because of what it suggests. It lingers in the background of your thoughts, resurfacing your unexpected moments, prompting you to question not just the story, but your own perception of reality. And perhaps that is its greatest achievement, not simply telling a story, but creating a psychological space that the viewer cannot easily escape.